For decades, tensions between China and Japan have simmered beneath the surface. What once took the form of territorial disputes and historical grievances has now evolved into something far more complex and far more dangerous. This is no longer just a political rivalry. It is a battle for technological dominance and control over the very materials that power the modern world. If you look at a map of the Pacific Ocean, you might not notice anything unusual at first glance. But beneath that calm blue surface lies a slow-moving strategic contest. A quiet tightening of influence that has been unfolding for years. At the center of it all is Beijing. The leadership of China has spent decades building an enormous advantage in one critical area: rare earth elements. These obscure materials, unknown to most people, are essential for everything from smartphones to missile guidance systems. Without them, modern technology simply stops. Over time, China secured control over a massive portion of global supply. By refining, processing, and exporting these materials, it positioned itself as the backbone of the world's high-tech industries. And with that control came power. For years, many countries quietly adjusted their policies to avoid disrupting access to these vital resources. It wasn't always visible, but the pressure was there, subtle, strategic, and effective. From Beijing's perspective, the plan was working perfectly. But no strategy is flawless. If you shift your focus slightly eastward, you'll find a nation that refused to remain dependent. Japan. Unlike others, Tokyo understood early on that relying too heavily on external supply chains, especially from a rival, was a long-term vulnerability. So instead of accepting the situation, Japan began searching for alternatives. And eventually, it found one. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, near a remote and little-known island called Minami Torishima Island, scientists discovered something extraordinary. At depths of nearly 6,000 meters, the seabed holds vast deposits of rare earth-rich mud, containing millions of tons of valuable elements. This wasn't just another resource discovery. It had the potential to reshape the global balance. Among these materials are critical heavy rare earth elements like dysprosium, terbium, and yttrium. Substances that are incredibly difficult to source, yet absolutely essential for advanced military systems. To understand their importance, you need to look at modern warfare. The sensors that guide stealth aircraft, the precision systems inside missiles, the sonar technologies used by submarines all depend on these elements. Even the advanced systems inside jets like the F-35 Lightning II rely heavily on them. Without these materials, even the most advanced military equipment becomes significantly less effective. Japan's discovery changed everything, but having resources is one thing. Processing them is another. Extracting rare earth elements, especially from deep-sea deposits, is incredibly complex, expensive, and technologically demanding. And even if Japan could mine them successfully, it still needed a reliable partner to refine and integrate these materials into global supply chains. That partner would come from far beyond Asia. In April 2026, in a quiet meeting in Tokyo, a major agreement was signed, one that didn't make immediate global headlines but carried enormous implications. Japan had found an ally in Europe, not just any country, but one with both industrial strength and strategic ambition: France. This partnership created something unprecedented, a technological and industrial bridge stretching nearly 10,000 kilometers between Asia and Europe. It wasn't just about trade, it was about independence. France brought to the table something equally valuable: advanced refining capabilities and a determination to reduce reliance on external powers. At the center of this effort is a major facility in southern France, an emerging hub for rare earth recycling and processing. This facility aims to produce and refine some of the very same elements that China has long dominated. Together, Japan and France formed a system designed to bypass traditional supply routes. For Beijing, this was deeply concerning. For years, control over rare earth elements had provided a powerful lever, one that could influence global markets and shape geopolitical outcomes. But now that leverage was being challenged. And not by a single country, but by a coordinated alliance spanning continents. The timing was not accidental. Tensions between China and Japan had already escalated in recent years. Military activity in the region had increased. Naval patrols, airspace incursions, and strategic maneuvers became more frequent. Advanced platforms like the Type 055 destroyer and the Chengdu J-20 began appearing more regularly near contested areas. These actions signaled more than routine operations. They reflected growing anxiety. Because from Beijing's perspective, the stakes were rising. If Japan succeeded in developing its own resource pipeline and strengthening it through partnerships like the one with France, it could weaken China's long-standing dominance. And that dominance was not just economic, it was strategic. Rare earth elements are deeply tied to national security. They influence defense capabilities, industrial output, and technological innovation. Losing control over them would mean losing a key advantage. Meanwhile, Japan continued moving forward. By combining domestic resource exploration with international cooperation, Tokyo began building a more resilient supply chain, one less vulnerable to external pressure. And France, with its own motivations, stood firmly alongside it. For Paris, this was not just about resources, it was about positioning. As global competition intensified, France sought to strengthen its role as a major technological and industrial power, independent, capable, and globally relevant. The collaboration with Japan aligned perfectly with that vision. Together they created something new. Not just a partnership, but a strategic counterbalance. A system designed to withstand pressure and reshape the future of global supply chains. But as history has shown, shifts like this rarely happen without consequences. Because when one power begins to lose its grip, it doesn't simply step aside. It reacts, and in this case, the reaction was already beginning to unfold. As the partnership between Japan and France began to take shape, the global landscape started to shift in subtle but undeniable ways. For years, the world had operated under a quiet assumption that access to rare earth elements would always pass through one dominant source. That assumption was now being challenged. And in Beijing, the implications were impossible to ignore. The leadership of China had long relied on its position as the primary supplier of these critical materials. This dominance allowed it to influence pricing, control exports, and, when necessary, apply pressure on other nations. But now, cracks were beginning to form in that system. The agreement between Tokyo and Paris represented more than cooperation. It was a direct challenge to an established order, and it arrived at a moment when tensions were already running high. In recent years, economic friction between China and Japan had intensified. Trade disputes, technological restrictions, and political disagreements created an environment of growing distrust. By early 2026, these tensions escalated further. New export controls were introduced, limiting the flow of key technologies and components. Several major Japanese corporations faced restrictions, complicating their operations and disrupting supply chains. Industries that depended on precision engineering and advanced materials felt the impact almost immediately. But the pressure didn't stop there. Tourism, an often overlooked economic link, became another point of leverage. Travel flows shifted dramatically, creating sudden gaps in local economies. The message was clear: pressure could be applied in multiple ways. Yet instead of yielding, Japan adapted. Rather than relying on a single source, Tokyo expanded its economic partnerships. New markets were explored, alternative supply routes were developed, and domestic industries were strengthened. It was not a quick process, but it was deliberate, and it was effective. At the same time, the partnership with France accelerated. In southern Europe, new facilities moved closer to full operation. These sites focused on refining and recycling rare earth materials, turning raw inputs into usable components for high-tech industries. The goal was not just to compete, but to create stability, to ensure that supply could continue even under pressure. For France, this effort aligned with a broader strategy. Under the leadership of Emmanuel Macron, the country has emphasized the importance of strategic autonomy, reducing dependence on external powers while strengthening internal capabilities. The collaboration with Japan fit perfectly into that framework. It combined technological expertise with geopolitical alignment, and it sent a signal that Europe and Asia could work together in ways that reshaped global dynamics. Meanwhile, the significance of Japan's offshore discoveries continued to grow. The deposits near Minami Torishima Island were not just large, they were transformative. If fully developed, they could supply critical materials for decades, possibly longer. This potential changed calculations, because it meant that future supply chains might no longer depend on a single dominant provider. Instead, they could become diversified. In others, they escalate. Across the Pacific, attention increasingly turned toward a different focal point: Taiwan. Unlike rare earth elements, Taiwan offers something equally, if not more, valuable: semiconductors. These tiny components power nearly every modern device, from smartphones and vehicles to advanced military systems. And one company sits at the center of it all: TSMC. Responsible for producing a significant portion of the world's most advanced chips, TSMC represents a critical node in the global technology network. Control over this industry would carry enormous implications for any nation. As the balance of power in rare earth elements begins to shift, some analysts suggest that focus could move towards semiconductors. Because in the modern world, control over materials and control over technology are deeply connected. If one advantage is lost, another may be pursued. That possibility introduces a new layer of uncertainty because the stakes are incredibly high. Any disruption in semiconductor production would have global consequences, affecting industries, economies, and security systems across multiple continents. This is why developments in the region are watched so closely, not just by governments, but by companies, investors, and institutions worldwide. Meanwhile, the partnership between Japan and France continues to evolve. What began as a strategic agreement is gradually becoming a broader framework, one that connects resources, technology, and policy. It represents a different approach, one based on cooperation rather than control, resilience rather than dominance. Whether this model will succeed in the long term remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: the global landscape is changing. The era of a single dominant supplier is giving way to a more complex system, one defined by alliances, innovation, and competition. And in that system, every decision carries weight, because the resources at stake are not just economic assets. They are the foundation of modern civilization. From defense to communication, from energy to artificial intelligence, everything depends on them. As the world moves forward, the choices made today will shape the balance of power for decades to come. And somewhere beneath the surface, both literally and figuratively, the silent war for control continues.